Hey y'all, it's Brody, and today I'm here to talk about designing women. Today I'm here to do a review of The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix, and if that title does not tell you everything that you need to know, then I don't know what to tell you. This is a 2020 horror novel that follows a group of small town southern ladies in like the 80s and 90s that have a true crime book club. And then this sexy stranger moves into town who they're all kind of like low-key wanting to fuck, but then they realize that he's a vampire and that he's killing people. This is going to be kind of a spoilery video because I've determined that like I can't do a book review without there being spoilers because I can't properly discuss everything that I want to talk about. So sorry for that. If you haven't read it, then bounce off this video, or if you don't care about spoilers, then just stick around. Before we get started, I want to list off some trigger warnings, of which there are a lot because this is a horror novel. So here is my computer. Trigger warnings for gore, death of both adults and children, suicide, mentions of drug use, animal abuse, gaslighting, discussion of Nazis, stigmatization of AIDS, domestic abuse, infidelity, racism, sexism, implied dementia, child abduction, rape, grooming, dismemberment, implied pedophilia, and lots of blood. I told y'all there was a lot in this. So overall, I did enjoy this book. I want to talk about the things that I enjoyed first, and then the last topic I have is a little bit of a tricky topic, so we'll get to that after I get the positives out of the way. First, I loved this small town portrayal. Very accurate to like the small southern like tight-knit lifestyle, all the gossip and how quickly it spreads from person to person because all the housewives are sitting at home all day and they just like call each other on the phone and they're like, did you hear about what Mary Ellen did? It's really accurate. Like the way that once you do one thing that's like kind of a big deal, that's what you're known by forever. So stuff like one of the housewives who vacuumed up a snake because she didn't know what to do to another one of the housewives attempting suicide. Like that's what you're known as for the rest of your life, and that's very true. In my tiny town, I was known as the gay person because I was the only out queer person in the town. Also like the way that the sexism is approached in this book because even though the housewives are viewed as lesser than by their husbands who are the breadwinners and they're, the men are going out and they're making the money and they're, they have the jobs and the businesses and stuff, everyone kind of views the women as just like, oh, you're just a little, biddy sitting around in your house and cooking my dinner and you're just gossiping and talking the day away and you're not really providing anything. But that's not the reality that these women face. I'm pulling a direct quote from the book by one of the characters. I will be doing that in here. So that's this. Why do you pretend what we do is nothing? She asked. Every day, all the chaos and messiness of life happens, and every day we clean it all up. Without us, they would just wallow in filth and disorder, and nothing of any consequence would ever get done. I thought it was interesting how the men in their life, and this is true, this is something I've experienced firsthand, where the men will be like, oh, you're not doing anything, I'm the one with the job, I'm the one who's making the money, blah, blah, blah. In reality, these women are the ones who are doing all the cooking, all the cleaning. They're, not just keeping house, they're keeping their husbands happy, and they're taking care of their children, and they're doing, like, sports games, and soccer practice, and debate team, and all this. They're running the show. And they're just viewed as like weak and unimportant because they're not making money and they're not contributing. I thought it was really interesting that was even brought up because that's not something that I see discussed a lot, especially in horror novels. This book hit a lot of really interesting points that I wasn't expecting. And I love that the women are so vocal about like everything they do and how it's important and how it's a value, even if it's not viewed as valuable by everyone around them. The way that these women talk about their strength, I thought was amazing. A character is raped. They are all, sitting in the hospital and they're talking and, discussing like how people don't view us as seriously because we're women. She says, they see us as what we look like, a nice southern lady, but there's nothing nice about a southern lady. So, throughout the course of the book, as they're discovering that this man is not just a human, he's a vampire and he's killing people, there's a lot of, like, ups and downs as to, like, whether they're going to help because their husbands don't want to. And this is because a lot of them face like domestic abuse issues, or their husbands are alcoholics, or their husbands are cheating on them, or they're just trying to hold their family together, or they don't want society to view them negatively. And I loved the internal conflict of all of these side characters because it is realistic. Like, we would all like to believe that if something was happening that we would jump in without hesitation. But this is, we're talking about vampires. So if you thought someone was a vampire and you thought that someone was hurting your children, would you automatically jump in and tell everyone at the town hall, be like, yeah, that man's a vampire? No, you wouldn't. You would be like weighing the pros and cons and saying like, am I seriously thinking that this guy is drinking blood, or am I just, is there something else going on, and is it worth me being known for the rest of my life as the lady who saw vampires? Because that's what happens. I also loved how atmospheric this book was. It definitely gets, like I said, the small town life, right? But just the description and the way that Grady Hendrix writes, like, you can feel the humid southern air and it's sticking to your skin. And you can, like, taste all of the food that they're bringing for potluck. And you can, like, you're just there. He does such a good job of writing that just, like, wraps you up into it. And you're there with these women facing these struggles, and I thought it was amazing. Hi, Editing Brody popping in here to say that I forgot to include something I wanted to just bring up right quick. There's a scene in the book where they're talking about book club and what books they read, and how Patricia's daughter doesn't like to read books, and the vampire says, like, why don't you read books? And she's like, well, I read them for school. And he's like, well, I think you should just read what you want to instead of listening to what people tell you. Because if you're only reading what people tell you, what people want you to read, then that's kind of pathetic. And I just think that Grady Hendrix came for booktube culture. Now I want to dive into the part of the book that I was talking about that seemed a little, like, tricky to me. That's the way that race and class are handled in this book. Like I said, this book hits a lot of, like, social justice points, and I think it's good for horror to have commentary like that because, yes, vampires are scary, but what's scarier in real life than racism or classism or sexism? These things that we face daily. I love whenever books include stuff like that. So it's like you have the big bad of the vampire, but then you also have, like, racist people and, like, poverty and sexism and domestic abuse and real life stuff as well, because that gives us something to connect to. So we can feel more for these characters, because, like, it's hard to feel for a character if they're just scared of a vampire, but whenever they're scared because their husbands are beating them, that's something you can sympathize with. And I like when things are explored properly in books like that, and I think that Grady Hendrix did a mostly good job with this. He took sensitive topics and handled them really well. However, the way that race and classism are talked about in this book is something I was not expecting, and I want to discuss a little bit. The children being targeted by the vampire are Black from a low-income neighborhood. There's one Black woman in the group, her name is Mrs. Green, and she's not part of the book club, but she takes care of our protagonist Patricia's mother-in-law in, like, a kind of hospice-y scenario. And whenever Miss Green was first introduced, I was kind of nervous. I was like, okay, so we're going to have the one Black character being, like, a service worker taking care of, like, an elderly white lady. And that was not the case. Like, Miss Green kicked ass. There's a scene in the book where the mother-in-law, because she kind of knows something, right? She's older, she has, like, all these old photo albums, and she's starting to kind of spiral down. It's implied that she has dementia, even though that's not mentioned on the page. And so the vampire, because vampires can control animals in this canon, he sends, like, an army of rats after them, and it's like, the rats kill the mother-in-law, but Miss Green, she's fucking fighting. She's, like, kicking them and squashing them and slinging them around and calling, like, the dog after him, and she's, like, trying to save this woman who is her charge. And Miss Green kind of shows us from then on that she's a badass. And after the mother-in-law dies, Patricia goes to Miss Green's house, and she's like, hey, I just wanted to talk to you, and, like, we know you're out of work right now, here's your check until you can come back and help us, because we do need help with the house. And Mrs. Green starts telling her about the vampire and how it's the children in her neighborhood who are going missing. And first that they think it's going to be, like, a drug-related thing, because children are disappearing into the woods with this white dude, and they are like going kind of loopy and dazed, and then they're killing themselves. And Mrs. Green has 2 kids, and she's like, I don't want my kids to be next. Can you please help me? When I tell someone what's happening out here, they see an old woman living in the country who'd never been to school. When you tell them, they see a doctor's wife from the old village, and they pay attention. I find this kind of interesting because on one hand, it does make sense. We know that because of racism, people of color are often dismissed when it comes to issues they face. They're viewed as uneducated, or that's just how they are because of racist stereotypes. People tend to look the other way whenever people of color, especially black people, are facing problems. I do understand where Mrs. Green is coming from by asking a well-respected, well-educated white lady for help. Because Patricia's more likely to be taken seriously than she is because racism. Patricia agrees, obviously, A, because she's our protagonist, but B, because she's a mother, and she doesn't want to see these kids dying, and she's already kind of sketched out by James, the vampire, and she's like, you know, there's something weird going on here, and I don't want children to die, and I owe it to this woman who helped save my mother-in-law. So, like, I get all of that, but the entire time that I'm reading this book, I'm like, this is literally the white savior complex. So I get it, but Patricia did feel very white savior-y, and even though Ms. Green is a badass character and can hold her own, I was still just like, why? Where it's like, I understand, and everything does tie together nicely. However, like, you couldn't have just made, like, a couple of the book club ladies not white? I guess that's what I'm getting at here. It seems like Mrs. Green was, while she is a character in her own right, to me, it just seems like she's kind of a plot device to move the protagonist forward, and I don't like it whenever the few characters of color in books are used to push the white hero, you know, up. It bugs me. So I guess what I'm saying is, I'm not black. I can't speak to this experience. I do recommend that you go check out reviews by black reviewers for this book, though, and just see, because it's just something I thought that I would point out. I still wanted to talk about it in this video so that people can make a judgment call on whether or not they want to pick it up, but I can't say one way or the other whether it should have been included. It's just something that I noticed. So go check out black reviewers. And you should just be supporting black reviewers all the time, period. Don't just support white people. It's not a good look. Before I leave, I want to mention some comp titles for this book because the entire time I was reading it, I kept comparing it to other pieces of literature or TV shows or whatever. So we have Steel Magnolias, Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe, Designing Women, Candyman, Dracula, Mom's Got a Date with a Vampire. Actually, Candyman is a really good comp title for this. It's basically like if, oh, I can't say it a third time, there's a mirror right there. So it's basically like if Tony Todd in that movie was a vampire, and it took place in, like, Georgia, and the main characters all like to read true crime novels. I did end up giving this book 5 stars because it hit a lot of high points for me. I think it was done well, and the parts that I'm a little iffy on whether they were done well, I can't speak to that experience. So if I see some more Own Voices reviews for this, I might drop my rating down a little bit. I'm not sure. I'll just have to wait for more reviews to roll in and see what other people are saying. That's all I have for you in this video. If you've read this book, let me know your thoughts down in the comments, or if you haven't read this book and you just stuck around, let me know if you're gonna read it. Comment question of the day. I'm gonna talk about vampire books. Let me know your favorite vampire books down in the comments, and also give me a comp title for it. So like this one was, this book is like Designing Women meets Dracula. Pitch me your favorite vampire book with comp titles down in the comments. And if you don't want to do that, or you don't have the spoons for that, just leave me an emoji, preferably a yellow heart, so I know that you made it all the way until the end. I know that book reviews do not do that well on BookTube, which is kind of ironic, but I still wanted to do this because I really enjoyed it, and I had some kind of conflicting feelings about it. All of my social media stuff will be down in the downstairs, so go follow me on that. We can talk more. My DMs are open. We can chat. We can have a good time. But yeah, I hope you have a wonderful whatever it is, wherever you are, and I will see you next time for another video. Okay, cool. Thank you for watching. Bye.